Hi, everyone. Today we are moving on to part two of our series, The Life of a Woman, the realities of the 20s and the 30s. Those were the years that were supposed to sparkle, on the surface. They promise new careers, blossoming relationships, perhaps starting a family, and maybe even the best hair of our lives. Our hair went from long straight hair to short shoulder length hair to getting perms to teasing our bangs all the way as high as they would go and back to long wavy hair. These years were painted as a time of excitement and endless possibilities. So, what happened? I would like to take a second to welcome you if you're new here to my channel, So Curious. I'm so glad you joined us. And if you're a returning viewer, I appreciate you so much for watching. It means a lot to share these conversations together. So, what happened in our 20s and 30s? Well, for many women, these years were some of the most challenging. Beneath the surface, the choices we made in our 20s and 30s often carried far reaching consequences. Every decision, whether about work, relationships, or personal growth, it began shaping the path we would walk for years to come. This period was marked not only by anticipation and ambition, but also by the weight and permanence of the decisions we faced. Relationships added their own set of struggles. If you're married too young, you were judged. If you waited too long, judged again. If you chose not to have kids, well, people just thought that you owed them an explanation. And some of us, we were chasing careers, others chasing stability. But either way, someone always seemed ready to critique our choices. In our 20s, many of us found ourselves trying to balance all the responsibilities we now faced. Marriage, babies, grown young children, the start of our careers, household duties, cooking, cleaning, handling the bills. We started to become superwoman, tackling daycare, husbands, work, outside entertainment, family, and friends. We burdened ourselves with, we have to do it all right now. While some handled the pressures with ease, many were exhausted and overwhelmed. The term me time started to be heard around the world in the 1980s. Me time activities, such as reading, taking a bath, walking, meditation, doing a hobby, they were typical examples. It meant being free from consideration for others and obligations, doing something to follow your own desires. To top it off, we had the unwanted harassment from work to add to our frustrations, which I will be adding details to that towards the end of this video, so stay tuned. The transition from adolescence to early adulthood, we found that our personality changed and developed, which changed our relationships. We began to lose childhood friends due to college, work, and our dating relationships. It became more important for us to find new friends that we could connect with, and we often found that that was harder than expected. By your 30s, as your children grew and your job became more stable, or it was the start of your career, you settled into more of a pattern. You again noticed a shift, though, in your earlier friendships. Some friends married, had children, others didn't. Some moved across the country. I did. Others dove into careers. Suddenly, your inner circle wasn't so constant. That quiet loss stung, even though we rarely talked about it, because you realize that your circle of friends was even smaller. Entering into the workforce became another place that we quickly had to adapt. It came with a new set of rules, gender bias, and leadership roles being dominated by males. We entered the force full of ambition, ready to prove ourselves. And almost immediately, we realized proving ourselves meant doing it twice as hard as the men who worked beside us and for a lot less pay. I even still remember job interviews where the questions had nothing to do with my skills and everything to do with whether or not I was having children and how soon. Fortunately, nowadays, these questions can't be asked at interviews. That subtle bias and the smaller paychecks, it shaped our experience and it made it clear that the path to success would not be the same for everyone. We strived for self improvement and self awareness. We wanted to leave a good impression on employees and our colleagues and supervisors to continue towards a career. We needed to take initiative and make decisions in a way we never had to before. Working on shyness, self esteem, social anxiety, and then figuring out now how to deal with toxic people became even more important to having a fulfilling life. I mean, in your 30s, you have more experience. Your social networks tend to grow, including extended family members. You now have in laws or coworkers or even individuals connected to children, such as other parents. This expansion increased the likelihood of encountering toxic personalities in various settings. This is even more relevant presently. I mean, sadly, we are living in an era in which interpersonal toxicity appears to be on the rise. Behaviors such as entitlements are increasingly normalized, and incivility is no longer surprising. Toxic people can be found everywhere, making it harder to avoid negativity in daily life when all you're seeking is some calm. It may also be our patience starts to wear thin as we become older, having more demands, less time, and maybe willing willing to suffer less willing to suffer these fools. The need to manage and protect personal boundaries has now become even more important. So now that you're in your middle 30s, you're making money. You stopped wearing sweatpants to work and you started to invest in a more mature style of clothes. You bought the perfect little black dress. Every woman needs that. We do. Office appropriate high heels and designer bags that signal to the world I am now an adult with a wardrobe to match. It looks like you made it, or at least you thought you did. You suddenly realized that body image didn't magically disappear. It did not simply fade away as we moved into adulthood. Instead, the pressure intensified. Turning 40 was getting closer, and perhaps you started to gain a few pounds, or you're still carrying around a few pounds from having kids. With the rise of social media amplifying the comparison game, not only were you too curvy or not curvy enough, you were too career focused or you weren't domestic enough. These judgments, excuse me, echoed the rules and insecurities of our earlier times. But as adults, the stakes felt even higher and the consequences more significant. Navigating these conflicting expectations became a persistent challenge, shaping how we saw ourselves and how we believed others saw us. Adding to that fear of, not measuring up. If you're nodding because you lived or are living this, and don't forget to subscribe, hit like, and tap that notification bell. This series is walking us through the stages of life we've all endured and loved. So now it's time to talk about those unwanted harassments we experienced at work. There was another harsh reality that we faced, one that often went unnamed at the time: workplace harassment. better known as sexual harassment. The offhand remarks, the lingering touches, the jokes we were expected to laugh at and tolerate if we wanted to keep our jobs. Women were expected to know their place, and we were subjected to sleep their way to the top to keep their jobs, tolerate sexual innuendos, and intimidated with sexual comments about our looks, the way we dress, the way we used our body or walked. This was long before the Me Too movement gave us a voice. Back then, you had to shrug it off. You went home angry and frustrated. You learned to stay quiet and thought it was just the cost of being a woman in the workplace. The silence was heavy, and for many, its weight was carried for years. So, looking back, was there something that you felt pressured into during your 20s or 30s? I mean, maybe it was starting a family or staying in a job or even changing yourself to fit in. What did that pressure feel like? Share it if you feel comfortable. Chances are you'll find echoes of your story in others here. So, how did we cope? Coping strategies include, self reflection and goal setting, managing our social connections and prioritizing self care, support from friends, family, or professionals if it was needed. We focused on building our identity and career, forming strong relationships, and navigating life transitions, like leaving home or starting a family. We adapted to changing needs. For example, in our early 20s, we focused on quantity of social interactions to learn about the world, about what everyone else was doing. While in your late 20s and 30s, we shifted to prioritizing quality and deeper and more emotional connections. But most of all, we love the freedoms that came with those ages. We loved raising our children or being a part of someone's children. We felt proud that we knocked down barriers. We figured out how to keep all those plates spinning. We had a partner in life, memories of beautiful weddings, both yours and friends. We had nightclubs that gave us the opportunity to dress up and feel sexy and beautiful. We learned how to navigate through arguments with our spouse and others and when to compromise. We had a lot to be proud of. So stand tall and stay strong. So when you think back about your 20s or 30s, what's the one thing you miss or the one thing you're glad you left behind? Let us know in the comments. And next up is going to be the Life of Women series. In the Life of Women series is part 3, our 40s and 50s, our midlife, where the balancing act reached its peak and new struggles began to test what we were really made of. So if you watch this till the end, thank you so much for being a part of this series. And until we meet in part 3 of this series, bye.